Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. So excited for our show today. Today, we're going to be talking about writing for SEO. Writing specifically for search engine optimization. How can you get your website to rank higher, specifically through content and writing? And today we're going to be talking with Mandy Politi. I'm so excited that she's here. She is a senior SEO strategist at Optidge. She's highly skilled in SEO. We'll talk a little bit about her background, but it looks like she interned as early as 2015, 2016, started working in around 2018. So she has a lot of wonderful skill and background, and it's really, really exciting to chat with her today. How are you, Mandy?
Good, Danny. Thanks for the introduction.
Of course. All right. So before we jump into the main topic at hand, let's learn a little bit more about you. So where did you grow up? If you want to tell us a little bit about, where you went to school, that would be awesome.
Sure. So originally I'm Greek. So I grew up in Greece and I went to school in Athens. Then in 2014, I moved out from Greece. I moved into the UK. I went there to do my master's in applied linguistics at the University of Edinburgh. I stayed there for 5 years. And then the last 3 years, I have been living and working in Mexico City.
Amazing. So you're literally a globetrotter.
Yes.
I wonder, when you were little growing up in Greece, did you ever think ooh, I'm going to live around the world?
No, the truth is no. Actually, back when I was growing up, it was not really in the cards to move. But then recession came, European crisis came, so it started actually being a part of the ideal route if you wanted to get a better opportunity to study somewhere differently, to get better skills, to get to know the world. So it became easier to move around Europe. And then actually a lot of people of my generation, they moved out from Greece and they moved into the UK or to other European countries to study. And now it's actually the norm. But yeah, me, I would never actually imagine. It just happened quite quickly. And I would never imagine that I even would end up in Mexico, like in the other part of the world.
Yeah, totally random. It's amazing that you were brave to leave home. It's a big deal. So yes. I'm sure that's part of the reason why you're successful today. So you quickly told us about applied linguistics, which is what you were actually studying. So, at first glance, when we talk about languages, we can see a little bit of how it's connected to writing. But did your education and early experience, did it influence your decision to go into digital marketing?
Totally. Well, to be honest, the Greek educational system is very specific. We spent 12 years learning how to write, how to develop ideas, how to summarize ideas. We also learn how to understand content. So this actually put the idea on my head that I would like to do and work to do something around content and work around written content specifically. And this is how I ended up studying linguistics. Then when I started studying linguistics, it was not really in the cards for me to do SEO, for example. I wanted to initially follow an academic route, but then I started studying and I realized that there was a lot of science behind language and how people understand written and spoken discourse, basically. My specialization is in discourse analysis, specifically written. And as I started studying, I realized that there are so many elements in written text allow us to understand what we are reading and create ideas and conceptualize what we're reading, although we don't really realize when we're reading the text. So it started creating this idea of, okay, how can I use this information to create something that people will actually like? It will get them to engage more, or it will get them to return to me to read more. And slowly I started looking around how you can apply these skills, and I came across SEO, and it was love on the first sight. After that, I decided that I don't want to do anything else in my life apart from that. And it actually has helped me a lot. I think a big part of the success of optimizing content that ranks, it's that I am being very specific and I'm being very particular on the content that we create so that it's really nicely optimized for the users and for the search engines.
That is so amazing. And it's so cool because a lot of people, I think, especially old SEO was like, ooh, how can I actually go
Mhm.
and how do I rank content? It's by taking keywords and putting it 10 times on the page. But
Yeah.
obviously, what we're going to learn about today is it's not that simple. So it's really, it's like understanding what do people want?
Mhm.
What do they say? And it sounds like it's crazy, but like you would, sometimes people ask me, what's the best undergraduate degree I should get in order
Yeah.
to get into digital marketing. And I often say English, like to learn how to write English and say English.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to change my opinion now. I think it's going to be linguistical analysis.
Linguistics. I would totally recommend it. Actually, most people think that linguistics is about the study of languages in general. It's not. There are a lot of subfields like discourse analysis, which is my specialization. There's computational linguistics, semantics, pragmatics, social linguistics. So there are a lot of different aspects, and I totally recommend it. I think it gives you a really good idea of how people communicate through text. And if you want to go down the route of optimizing content, I think it makes total sense to understand what are these elements that make a text, a piece of content to be successful. So it really helps, to be honest. Although, again, to be fair, I think that if you want to work in digital marketing, you can, I know people that they come from a lot of different disciplines. So yeah, but linguistics is I would totally recommend it.
Yeah, I think there's room for lots of different people. But obviously, having a certain background or a certain study can help you, get
Yeah, yeah,
into a certain
totally.
area. Cool. Well, I think that's a really great intro. So I think let's hop into the topic at hand, which is writing for
Mhm.
SEO. So if we can first explain for the audience, what does it mean to write for SEO or optimize SEO in your writing?
At least to me, writing for SEO is writing for the user. It's writing in a way that provides value to the user, and in a way that it's what you are trying to say and the information that you are trying to convey is easy to understand from the perspective of the user. So for me, this is optimization. This is SEO optimization of a piece of content. It's not about adding keywords. I think this is actually not the most important part. It's creating something that is genuinely useful and will genuinely provide value to the user. And then on a secondary level, optimizing for SEO is helping search engines understand what this page is about, like using keywords and specific structural elements, like, for example, subheadings. But if I had to choose, I would totally choose about writing for the user, because this is the main goal of what we're trying to achieve when we optimize content.
I know people usually ask me, like, why is writing for SEO so important? But I think, like, with your definition, that really writing for SEO is primarily about users, right? It brings a lot of light to it. So, so how would you answer that question?
The content that we generate, it serves a purpose. We're trying to achieve something. So optimizing it for SEO means that you are making it the best possible version of what you can actually deliver to serve this purpose. So if we're writing a piece of content like an informational blog post about anything, about tiles, about plumbing, we want somebody to read it and get some value out of it. So the idea is we optimize the piece of content to serve the purpose of satisfying the search intent of the user who is going to land on the page, and they're going to spend their time reading it. So for me, this is why it's so important to optimize, because I think that many people optimize thinking that they're going to rank, but that's not that's the journey. It's not the actual destination, because you are going to rank, but then what are you trying to achieve? You want to get people in, and you want people to stay, and you want these people to find your content useful enough to stay on the page and get some value out of it. So for me, if you change the perspective and think that I'm not optimizing to rank, but I'm optimizing to create something that's really good and is going to be useful for the users, that's the value of SEO. That's why you optimize it. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We understand that's important to write for SEO, write for users.
Mhm.
So what are the effects that can come from good SEO and bad SEO? So why don't we go with the good first? Like, what happens when you do it right?
Well, you get more users in. You get your brand known. You get people to interact with your brand and your website. You may increase your sales. You provide value, which is not always directly linked to sales, but it's also in terms of providing information, services, anything that a website sells, or what they're trying to achieve. And you're helping people to associate the brand with a useful hub of information, or a place where they can find what they're looking for, be it product, services, or just purely for like informational content.
Cool. And then what about bad SEO?
Well, but SEO, it can be I perceive it as two different ways. We have like black hat SEO, which means that you get people in thinking that they're going to find something, but then they end finding something else. They get like frustrated and they exit the site straight away. Or you can have bad SEO in the terms of you try to optimize, but you don't do it really well, and you end up with an extremely complicated piece of content that is really difficult to actually read. It doesn't really serve the purpose. It doesn't answer the user questions. Both have disadvantages, of course, mainly in the brand and the website, because slowly, well, if people go in and then they leave, obviously you're not going to keep your performance. You're not going to stay where you are. And second, people are not going to really identify your brand or website as the place to be for what they're looking for. So it goes both ways. If you're asking me, I think that both are equally bad, like the black hat SEO practices, and also optimizing in a way that it's not putting like the user in the middle, in the center of what you are doing. So it's both can actually have negative impact.
Yes, and when you go down the path of black hat SEO, then you can get penalized by Google. And if you go down the path of it's just not being so clear, then naturally, when Google sees people come to your website and then they go back to Google because they didn't find that what they wanted, you're sending those signals. And what it's going to cause is Google's not going to want to put your piece of content, your website, on the first page because it doesn't provide value and pushes you lower.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have an interesting question that I wanted to share with you from one of my students.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have a scenario where someone who's like, let's say, an orthodontist, right? Someone who helps correct people's, smiles, their teeth are crooked. And, let's say we see that the term Invisalign is searched a lot. And Invisalign is a type of braces that someone wears, but it's not actual braces, right? It's more of like a retainer, and it allows you to correct your teeth even without the metal braces. So the question is let's say if I am a orthodontist who doesn't offer braces, but I only offer Invisalign, is it wrong to try to rank for the word braces? And then when people come, you tell them braces are really great, but you know what? You really want to try out Invisalign. Some people might look at that as like a bait and switch, right? Someone's looking for braces, and now when they come to it, you're not talking about braces, you're pushing them to try something else. The other way of looking at it is that's actually, that's cool. Like you're seeing what people are searching for, grabbing that traffic, and then pushing them to something else, which you honestly feel is better. So I'd love if you could share your opinion on that.
I think you can do it, but in a smart way that, again, is going to be useful for the user. Because, for example, there might be users that are looking for braces because they don't know that there's another option. There are users who are considering trying something, but they are not really sure what they're looking for. You can still rank for braces. You can create, for example, a piece of content that it's a comparison about the pros and cons of using one type of smile correction or the other. So I think that you can, but again, if you put the user in the center, you can make it in a way that is not clickbaity, and it's not in a way of I'm telling you that you are going to find braces related content. But when you actually enter, you say, okay, yeah, don't go to the route of down the path of braces because it's really bad. Try my own solution. Because again, most users are going to feel deceived, or they're going to feel like, okay, now you're trying to sell me something, and that's not what I came to read here. So I think that you can, but in a way that makes sense without trying to manipulate the results and the user attention. So, for example, creating a comparison guide, or creating when it's best to use one way or the other solution. I think it that way, for example, it does make sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. So the way I look at it and the way kind of you explained it is it's okay. And if anything, it could be a good strategy, but it just depends on how you implement it, right?
Exactly.
Is the goal to deceive, or is the goal to educate and provide people with options and opportunities? And I think if it's the latter, then it's a really good thing to do. So let's get into a little bit more of like the minutia, the details. So like, what's your process, when we talk about writing for SEO, and trying to figure out like what's going to be best for users? What are some of the things you do? What are some of the tactics? I know there's a lot going on. If you were to put like the top 3 to 5 things that you kind of do, it would be awesome to share.
Okay, so let's say that I'm trying to create a blog post around a specific topic, and I want to decide what should I write and how should I write it. The first thing I do is I go on Google. I truly believe that no tool ever is going to give you as much information as you need to do your job as an SEO than Google itself. So I really like going manually on Google and searching for different keywords. I try to understand the search intent behind the terms that I am trying to target. I'm trying to understand what comes up and what would the right user that I'm trying to target would look and what they would expect to find. That's the first step. The second step is I actually click on all the top performing page, on the top performing blog post or other types of pages on the first page of Google, and I have a quick look on them. I'm trying to see what kind of content do they have. Do they have videos? Do they have it? Are like purely blog posts? Do they have a lot of images? Do they have like step-by-step guides? Do they have at least 10 different headers and subheaders? Do they have elaborate structures or not? So I'm trying to identify what is it that put this page on the first page of Google. What is the differentiator? I actually then like going on the second page of Google as well. I think you can find really good insights there. And then after I review the first and the second page of Google, I try to sit back and I'm trying to think, okay, now I have all this information. How can I create something that has all the information that everybody else has, but also something more? And how can I create something that it's basically better and more useful and more elaborate? I create the structure in like on a document. And then after that, again, I sit back and I say, okay, now does this structure make sense or is it too much? Am I giving too much information? It's going to end up being like extremely heavy and difficult for the user to go through. Is it really useful? Is it something that I would personally sit down and read? So that would be like the third step. And after that, I start collecting secondary and tertiary keywords that can help support the primary keywords that are relevant. I also like doing some quick research on these keywords as well to see what comes up, because sometimes some of these keywords, especially the secondaries that are also very important, they just tend to bring something completely different up. It's not directly, it's not always what you think. So that's why I like confirming and validating that each term that we're going to use, it's actually the term that we want to target. So I put all this information, and then the last step for me, which is very important, is I'm trying to position this piece of content on the existing content of the website and on the content that I know I want to create in the future. Usually if you have, for example, a content plan. So for me, it's very important that when we create content, it actually serves a purpose within the website. Like it falls into a specific cluster, for example, of other topics and subtopics. And I always make sure to add recommendations for these internal linking opportunities when I create, for example, the brief for a piece of content. Because in the end of the day, somebody who's going to end up on your page, they are looking for information. Let's say if it's a blog post, they will want to read something relevant, and the idea is to help them find more relevant information, stay more on the website, get to know what find more stuff basically. So I think that's also a very important part that sometimes SEOs forget to do, but the truth is you need it. You need to add you need to make sure that your content falls into the entire strategy of what you're trying to achieve.
That's an amazing summary. So it sounds like a lot of what you do is manual and manual research, which I think is awesome, right? I know there's tools out there. Are there any other, like any tools that you like to use in addition to the manual research?
Well, I use the same Rush. I use Answer the Public. I use Phrase, but I'm taking them with a grain of salt, because sometimes, for example, Phrase might come and tell you, okay, if you want to rank, you need to create a piece of content that has 500 words. But then if you actually check what ranks, it's 500 words, but it's really bad content. It doesn't mean that you have to do the bare minimum, because I think sometimes if you don't really have this critical thinking of how you want your content to be, you might end up just creating the bare minimum, like the minimum viable product of ranking, if you want to call it like that. But then it's just, you still need to go check what you're trying to compete against. It doesn't mean anything to write something on 500 words just because all the other ranking URLs, like pages, they have 400 words. So you, by adding 100 words, are going to be better in rank. In the end of the day, again, it's something like thinking, do I really want to do something like a little better than anybody else? And this brings me also to another point, that we don't want to create content that after 1 month is going to be redundant. I mean, I'm not talking about seasonal content or content that is specifically tied to a specific year, but you want content that is going to be useful for a while. So it makes sense to use the data that you find from different platforms and tools, but always validate it with Google to make sure that your content really answers the questions, and it's going to be there for a while, so that it's not going to just drop out of the first page because somebody else wrote something a little bit better just because they added, for example, a different section.
Yeah, and I think your point about taking tools with a grain of salt is so important, because especially I feel like a lot of people who start off in SEO and digital marketing in general, like they get these tools, they use them, and they think that they're like the Bible, right? Everything they say is perfect, and it's not true, right? Any tool you use, um, it's like you said, it's an assistant. It helps you, but really,
Exactly.
it's the person in the driving seat who's able to take that data, and that comes with experience. It's just something that people have to remember. It's hard because when you're first starting off, when you don't really know, you don't have experience, you want to rely on the tools a lot, but then you
Yes.
kind of have to realize, okay, like that's a great place to start, but that's only the beginning, and then you have to move from there.
I think that it's more important now that search intent is also so important. It's not about the keyword. Like if we were living in a world where just by adding keywords we would rank, yeah, fair enough, you can use a tool. But when you have things like what else is ranking? Is it video? Is it content? Is it page? Is it like a blog post? What is it? Is it anything? Like who are you competing against? What are the users expecting to see? And then the search intent changes as well. Then you have, for example, terms that the search intent changes if it's singular or plural. So you still need to validate what you are finding and all the data that you get from the tool. So for me, I know that the manual process like sounds really elaborate and that it takes a lot of time. In the beginning, it does take a lot of time, but I think it really helps you to build this kind of instinct of how you need to create a piece of content if you want it to perform really well, and you can actually learn to do it even faster if you start doing it. And like it's a process of trial and error. I did a lot in the beginning. Now it's faster for me to do it, and I think it's really useful, and it has helped me a lot to bring results.
Can we talk a little bit more about that trial and error? Like, what are things that you did, but then now you've realized that, okay, that's not the way to do it?
Well, when I started, I remember I was doing all this manual process, but I would be very fixated on, for example, using keywords. Then I quickly realized that, for example, the subheader structure was more important, the anchor text was more important, metadata was really important. In the beginning, also, I thought that there was no space for creativity and the personal touch of the writer. But then quickly I understood that if you help the writer understand what you're trying to achieve and how the different elements of a piece of content actually serve a purpose, you can work together to create something that is really good. Because I don't think that there is SEO content. I think that there is content that is really good for the user. So if it's really well optimized, it's not even SEO content anymore. It's just really good content for the user. And I think also many writers find it difficult to understand that, and they say, okay, so if I write SEO, I cannot write creatively or anything. So I started getting this. I started interacting with the writers. I started asking them like, what do you think about this piece of content, how we wrote it? Do you think it's really like structured and really specific? Do you think that we should update it a little, we should refresh it to be a little bit more creative to speak to the user? So by doing that, I actually understood that it's not necessary to follow a 100% strict structure if you want to rank and if you want to create good content. And something else that I did, which I think that sometimes, again, if you get really busy, you forget to do, is I actually go back on the content that we publish. I go back and I monitor. I check. I after a month, 2 months, I go to see, is it indexed? Does it rank for the terms that I wanted it to rank? Perhaps it ended up ranking for something else, and then I use this insight to re-optimize it. So for me, it's very important when you publish a piece of content, you don't just let it there to live. You go back and you check. And I think that that was the most important part because it gave me an understanding of how what I wrote was interpreted by search engines, especially using Google Search Console and seeing like, do I rank for this term that I wanted to target? And if not, you re-optimize, but you don't wait until 6 months or the next audit to do so. For me, this was a very, very important part, going back and reviewing the performance. And something really useful that I learned from this was, for example, don't be afraid to create longer content because you think that if, for example, you add a section below the fold, like below, it's not going to rank for this specific term. If the content makes sense in the total, and now especially that Google picks up snippets of from below the fold and not necessarily doesn't take you necessarily to the top of the page, you can still perform really well for that, even if it's not targeted directly on the metadata by following a very specific structure. But I learned that by writing longer blog post and then going back and really fast seeing that, okay, now this performs for this subtopic that I included, although I haven't targeted on the metadata or really early on the text. So how did that happen? And this helped me to generate faster similar content. So I always recommend to go back. I think that was the biggest trial and error of seeing what performs and how I'm going to create with a writer something that is going to be very good, and then going back to what was published and reviewing performance after a couple of months just to make sure that it performs for what I wanted to perform, and if not, to quickly reoptimize it and not just go and do that after a year.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like in the world of like Google Ads and advertising, people are like optimizing and analyzing all the time. When it comes to like SEO, like sometimes we just like, we have our checklists, like, okay, did we put the content out? Did we, optimize? Did we add internal linking? Bam, let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And they forget about, going back and optimizing. And I like, if you think about that's like, I think the first part is just like the beginning. Like the fun is like, ooh, what did I actually rank for and what can I do? So I think that's such an awesome lesson for our listeners. So thank you for bringing that up. So what I want to do is let's, I heard you before, you mentioned, oh, I write content briefs. So it sounds like, Mandy, that not all the time are you actually writing the content, but you're kind of like strategizing the content and then handing that off to a writer. I often have people tell me, Danny, do I actually have to write, if to get into SEO?
Yeah.
And I tell them, no, like you don't necessarily have to be a writer. You can work with writers. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, when you put together a content brief, which let's first talk about like, well, you've already mentioned like what's inside the content brief. It's going to talk about the keywords, the secondary keywords, what the structure should be. So when you hand that off to a writer, so, how does that go? Are there any challenges with that?
Yeah, totally. There are a lot of challenges actually. Depends also if you want to, if you can talk to the writer directly, or for example, if you're using a writer from a platform, let's say, and you don't really have direct communication, which makes it more challenging. I always like to have a chat with the writers, try to show them, I share screen, I show them what I'm trying to achieve with each section, why I'm very specific with the structure, things like that. Let's go for the more difficult part, how you can work with a writer that you cannot actually train directly, and you only have the briefs as the means of communication. What I like doing is I try to include as much information as possible in the brief so that the writer doesn't have to spend a lot of time looking for information outside. Of course, they can. I encourage them to also do their own research, but for me, it's very important that the writers know what are the terms we're trying to target, what kind of content we are trying to compete with, and what we are trying to outperform. And I make it very clear, for example, if all the top ranking pages have 10 steps on doing something, we will never rank if we only have 5. Nobody's actually going to go for the 5. So for me, it's very important for the writers to have visibility on what we are trying to outperform. So I always include this information on the brief. Then another thing is trying to adding links and making sure that they understand where this content is going to be positioned within um, the strategy. But then the challenge now comes on how the writer interprets all this information, if they actually use this information, if they understand the instructions, and if they actually follow the recommended structure, or if they try to make something more generic or, let's say, very creative, and then they start missing the point of keeping the subheaders, for example, or using relevant anchor text, which is very important. So in this case, what I like doing is that I really go through what the writer produced, and I provide specific feedback, and I make sure that my feedback is not just replace this with that. I explain why they have to replace something, what we're trying to achieve, and why it's important to follow the specific instruction. Again, in the beginning, it takes time, and you need to have a writer that is willing to actually spend the time and effort to do it. But bit by bit, you start identifying what are the strengths and weaknesses of each writer, and you are trying to build up on there. And then what I learned is one battle at a time. You cannot make somebody write the perfect SEO article or the perfect optimized article from the beginning. So you need to go like step by step, little bit by little bit. And just by providing all this really good feedback and explaining them why you are trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve, I try to adapt my future briefs to that. So every time I focus on a different thing, when I see that they have mastered it, I go ahead to something else. It takes a little bit of time, and it takes also a little bit of time of my time to actually prepare the article, to publish it, and to make some changes myself. But after a while, you start seeing that the writer actually picks up the way and how they should be doing it. And then they start generating content that it's better and it takes less time for you to prepare it. Like, I think for me, the best is adapting yourself to the writer instead of expecting the writer to adapt to you or your briefs. So the briefs are not just something static that I send to everyone. I change the briefs depending on the writer. And that's why I always, the first time that I'm working with somebody, I'm always paying closer attention to what they produce to make sure that my future briefs are adapted 100% to them, to leverage their strengths and to help them improve their weaknesses. And that, in the end, helps create better content and save a lot of time and money.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So it basically means that even when you create an amazing brief with all the instructions, with everything, but naturally, when you deal with writers, like they interpret it in different ways, and
Yes,
they
exactly.
sometimes don't even look at it, So I guess it's like it's just part of the game, right? Just like,
Yes.
if you deal with artists, right? They might think outside the box and, interpret things in different ways. Naturally, it sounds like, when you're outsourcing your SEO content to a writer, be prepared for, even with the brief, you're going to have to train them and be patient. And like you said, I love how you go in and actually adapt the brief moving forward on what they're good at, what they're not. But it sounds an amazing process. But I think what it also shows is if you're just a writer and like someone says, "Hey writer, can you please write an article about, this topic and rank for SEO?" Like these days, it's not enough. Like look how much time and effort goes into producing a piece of content, and really all the background information and making sure it's fascinating, and it really shows the value, right? When you have a good SEO strategist and
Yes.
writing team, that's what's necessary. But when you get together, you can create amazing results.
I think that we SEO people, we spend a lot of time auditing a website, reviewing existing content, making lists of this is what we're going to reoptimize, this is what we're going to consolidate. Then we create new content calendars. We do all of that, and then we tend to forget that the most important part is the actual part of the writing. That all of the things that we have so nicely put into a nice Excel document, we have shared with the client, we have shared with our teammates, are awesome. But if you don't have a good writer to actually write it and implement it and consolidate the content, keeping the unique information, but also adding something new, all the strategy is just going to fail. Like it's not going to work, because in the end of the day, it's the writer who is going to take the massive responsibility of producing and implementing what you envisioned for this specific piece of content, for example, that you want to consolidate. So it's really interesting that we often take it for granted that we will have the right person to actually do it, but that's not the case. You have to work hard to teach somebody to do it, and that's why I think it's really important to spend time to do very specific personalized briefs to the writer. And what I always like to say to them is, when you finish writing this article, sit back and think, would this piece of content would be something that you would actually read? Like, would you spend your time reading it? And I think it's like a revelation for them. They're like, actually, I don't think that I would spend time read that. Like, let me rewrite it. So it's always useful to try to to have this kind of relationship with the writer. And if you cannot, try to at least adapt the briefs. And I think from this is something that I learned, for example, recently, that you can still get really good results with a writer who has no clue about SEO writing, just by doing online briefs and just adapting them to this specific person to make sure that you're going to pull the strengths out of what they can achieve. And again, that's a whole mindset of don't try to go for perfection from the beginning, just try to get something better over time. And this helps to save more time and money again faster. And it helps produce better results for what you're trying to achieve with your strategy, but also for your clients.
I love it. And, obviously our podcast is about mentorship. And I think you've brought up such a important point when it comes to mentorship, that, it's not one size fits all. You might have a plan, you might have a process, you might have a way of teaching people, but honestly, every individual is different. And you have to look at who that person is and see what's the best way for them to learn and to understand. So whether it's with writers, whether it's with your employees, with other people, like it's there. Regarding mentor, like who has been your biggest mentor in learning to write for SEO or just SEO in general?
The Greek educational system. No, it's true, because it doesn't, like in Greece, I think in other countries as well, you have like the 12 years of formal education, and you can choose after a while if you want to go down the road of classical studies or physics or mathematics or stuff like that. But no matter what kind of path you want to follow, we do spend every single year of formal education learning how to write, how to understand, how to develop, and how to summarize ideas. Summarizing is I think is the most difficult. It's even more difficult than developing. So I actually learned that from there. We actually learn how to write, why we need to write a specific way, the different what makes a piece of content good. Like we actually spent a lot of all of our years in formal education learning how to do that. And then the second biggest mentor is I think is myself, because I was really into the trial and error, and I spent a lot of time trying to teach myself how to do it well. Like I went out on Google, I typed terms, I saw what was coming up, I analyzed it. So yeah, I think I learned from all my teachers back in Greece, and from myself, that I actually had the passion to sit down and spend a lot of time trying to reverse engineer what ranks and why in terms of content.
SEO is something that is changing all the time. So how do you personally stay up to date with SEO changes, and do you have any favorite resources?
All types of newsletters. I really like the Moz newsletter, Ali De Solis newsletter. My inbox is always full of any kind of newsletter that is related to SEO. I think something that is really important if you want to stay on top. You cannot really stay on top of everything because things change every single day. But it's important to set aside some time during the day or at the end of the day to at least stay like 5-10 minutes, read something, even if it's one article. I think most people just think that I'm going to do it on the weekend or I'm going to read everything on the weekend. It's not possible. Just if you try to do like small bits on a daily basis, I think that's the best.
I feel like I speak about this on every episode, but yeah, I mean, ideally I know for my teammates, I like them to block out like 20-30 minutes every day on their calendar to actually go and read the SEO news and the digital marketing news, because that's how you pretty much stay up to date. But I'm a big newsletter fan as well, right? That's how I know
Yeah.
everything. And Twitter, but we'll see what happens with Twitter. What trends or changes do you see coming in SEO? Do you see anything that's changed, or you feel like kind of where we're at right now, it's going to pretty much stay the same for a little bit?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wish I could predict, to be honest. I think that it's always going to be about creating better content. And it's. I think that Google will always come up with something new that you have to include and something different that you have to do if you want to do what they want us to do. Like when we optimize to create really good content that will help users find what they're looking for. I think search is changing in a very interesting way in terms of how users now leave Google, for example, if they want to look for local things to do. Like, for example, for a restaurant, before you would go on Google and you would look for like Italian restaurant near me. Now you probably are going to find something on Google, but then you're immediately going to go on Instagram to check like the pictures and the food and what they serve and if it's like has a good vibe. So I think it's interesting how search is going to change to now accommodate, complement, or are they going to get users back on interacting and using results from Google instead of going on an external platform? I think this is really interesting to see where it's going to go.
Yeah, but I think we can all agree that things do change.
Yes,
but
yeah,
but
daily.
yeah, so the soul is the same, but sometimes what the outside or the clothing, like you said, what's going to be the type of content that Google wants in the future. But in the end of the day, it's really about the users. Cool. So before we end, would love to know. I believe you're a big reader, and would love to know what are your top 3 books that you're reading now, or just in general that you like to recommend.
The first is The Ride of a Lifetime by Robert Iger. He was the CEO of Walt Disney for 15 years. It's one of the best books I have read in a while. I really liked the part about how you shouldn't go after perfectionism, but just try to deliver something that is not just good enough. So it's really going after perfectionism, but it puts it into a different frame and a different perspective. So it helps you to actually deliver something better and faster. The second book is Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is about how to form good habits and stop doing bad habits. I think it's really interesting because it again focuses more on instead of going, for example, what we usually say, I'm going to go on a diet on a Monday, for example. It's not like that. Or I'm trying to improve how many times I'm working out during the week. It's just how you can start with smaller steps choosing your battles and trying to put it into realistic goals. And the third book is Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor, which is about positive reinforcement if you want to get the best out of your pet. But also, it actually has applications in colleagues, family, friends. It's a really good way of how you can use positive reinforcement to get the best out of everybody. And it actually helps a lot to understand the psychology of it, how people and how pets behave, and how you can, with a positive attitude and with positive reinforcement, you can actually achieve better results. So these are the three books that I actually read. I really liked it. I highly recommend everybody to read.
I love those choices. I feel like they like speak you. Like if we were to be like, what's Mandy's books? What represents her brand? It's so on brand for you, Mandy. I love it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Today was so awesome. Such a informative conversation. Learned so much, and your passion really shines through. We're very lucky at Optidge to have you, and I hope many others learn from you. Quickly, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I suppose LinkedIn. It's
Yeah,
Mandy Politi.
Mandy
Yes.
Politi on LinkedIn. Wonderful. All right, Mandy, thank you so much, and hope to
Thank you,
speak to you
Danny.
again soon.
Sure. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.